In this video, I'm going to give you some useful tips about buying 3/4-inch plywood for cabinet making and whatever else you might use 3/4-inch plywood for. So I've just been doing some cleaning in the wood shop and reorganizing, and I have here a variety of plywood that I have used in the past, and just wanted to make some comments and suggestions about what kind of varieties of plywood exist, what to look for, what to look out for in terms of pitfalls, and how to look for the best quality and source the best quality materials for whatever it is you're doing. So 3/4-inch plywood, you're going to make cabinet boxes out of it, furniture parts, and that sort of thing. And you want the process of screwing the boxes together with fasteners to work as effectively as possible. And if it doesn't work effectively, what happens is basically, poor quality plywood is going to split apart. And I'm going to just briefly explain why that's happening in these samples that I have and what it means to your project. So when the wood splits apart with the screw, it decreases that holding power considerably, and it also changes the dimension. If you're installing drawer slides in your cabinet and you screw the part together and it splits apart like that, it can actually impinge on the drawer slide, creating problems with the motion. And if you don't see that happening or hear it when you're fastening it together, then that can be a pitfall later on after the job is all done. I have a selection here of different materials ranging from the least expensive to most expensive. The most expensive being this Baltic birch plywood, which is a really dense and useful material for jig building, and you can do all kinds of things with it because it's just a very innovative structural material. I don't use a lot of Baltic birch because it's expensive and difficult to work with because it's hard. So for painted furniture, I'm going to choose lesser quality, but easier to paint, easier to work with material. And here's a variety of different options. So we've got what is called Chinese birch in some locales. It's not as available anymore. It used to be widely available 10 years ago, and I actually used to use it to make the stretcher frames. And for 20 bucks a sheet, there was nothing cheaper than Chinese birch, and it's made with a lot of multi-plies, but the quality is fairly low. There's a lot of voids, a lot of defects, but the upside is it was really cheap, and it actually has a really nice smooth sanded veneer on it, which made it useful for painted surfaces. But it also has some kind of toxic glue with formaldehyde. So there's a toxicity factor with the Chinese imported birch, and I think that's why you don't see that being stocked as much. So I don't use this material anymore, and I select different options. So I buy my plywood at Home Depot, and in the Northeast we get a lot of our lumber products from Canada. If you're in a different part of the country, you might have different selections of different materials, and the quality and the type of material varies with the market fluctuating. So the plywood that's available one year might be slightly different the next year, and that's kind of the problem that I was having here with this material splitting apart. So there's a lot of talking in this video, I know, but there's some good information about what to look out for. So the best quality plywood, in my opinion, that you can get for general cabinet making and woodworking, making boxes is the poplar core plywood, which is this stuff. It's all poplar throughout. It's got poplar veneer and poplar plies inside. So poplar is a good versatile material. It's good for paint, and it's fairly stable, and it glues exceptionally well as a hardwood. So poplar makes a good plywood, and if you don't need a hardwood face veneer like birch, the poplar face veneer works fine. It's not really an attractive wood in terms of its appearance if you're not going to paint it. But for painted furniture, cabinetry, it's really ideal. Sometimes poplar core plywood can alternate with Douglas fir. You can see a core that looks like this. This is Douglas fir, a construction grade AC plywood. But essentially, you can put any type of veneer on this and make a hardwood veneer plywood with a Douglas fir core. If you have a choice, the poplar core is a better option. I used to work at a cabinet shop, and we would get it from one source that would be all Douglas fir core with pre-finished maple veneer, and that's what we made all the cabinet boxes out of. But if we just spent $1 or more per sheet and bought it somewhere else, we could get poplar core with the maple pre-finished veneer. And it really just made cabinet making a lot easier because the Douglas fir just wasn't as flat and would tend to split more, which might cause problems, as I explained before. So, you know, it's still a decent plywood, but if you have an option to choose the poplar core, you know, it's good to look out for this because it makes the best quality plywood. And but lately they've been sneaking in other materials. So this was probably 2 years ago. This was last year. And this plywood was from this year, which I made my last batch of frames out of. So they've been sneaking in this different kind of wood in here. And that's what's creating some of the problems here. So the screws that go into the poplar, solid poplar core really don't create a lot of splitting. The wood holds together, but when you start adding this mystery wood in here, the glue joint becomes a lot more sensitive. So what is this stuff? I thought it was Douglas fir before because they can use these types of wood interchangeably, but it's actually some kind of tropical wood in there that they're putting in. Something that looks similar to mahogany, but it's a lot denser and obviously does not glue as well. So you should look out for this stuff because you know, this, you know, the stuff from last year, you know, they started interchange, but this one is almost solid tropical hardwood inside this birch veneer plywood. And which is funny is that this is actually the more expensive grade. The poplar veneer is about $10 cheaper than the birch sanded veneer, but the core of the premium grade plywood is very problematic. And if you can look out for this stuff and avoid it, I highly recommend avoiding it because it really doesn't screw together very well and is a lot heavier. I actually did a calculation. I weighed these two pieces, the solid poplar, with these two pieces on my scale, and the mystery hardwood is 15% heavier than the poplar. So it's some kind of really dense variety that obviously doesn't glue very well and doesn't make very good workable plywood. Here's another plywood variety that's available at Home Depot. It's called sandy plywood. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but it's some generic plywood. And out of all of these varieties, this actually takes a screw the best. It's a very soft, lightweight plywood. So if you ever have a job where the weight of whatever you're building is a concern, you can use this kind of plywood. It's basically like 3/4 inch thick Luan, a very similar type of material, but it's very lightweight, very soft, and it screws very well, and it's easy to work with. But the veneer quality on it is fairly poor. It's got this kind of fuzzy grain on it, so I don't think you could really paint on it. So that's one of the problems with some plywood. If you need a paintable surface, the poplar or the birch is really the only practical option. You know, stuff like this is another option that you can get at Home Depot when available. It's basically just a fancier construction grade plywood, but it's sanded like super rough with like a planer abrasive, and so you really can't paint on it. And if you do try to sand it, it takes a very long time, so it's not worth it. So, well, that's my tip for today. If you want to get good quality plywood, look for the poplar. So, but sometimes it's hard to identify. So here's two different varieties of poplar. This stack here is all solid poplar, and this one is interchanged with a different kind of wood, but it's not Douglas fir. It's actually a different kind of softwood, but it's similar in hardness and density to the poplar. So there isn't a glue issue. So the screw goes in just fine and it doesn't split. So sometimes it's hard to tell what's going on, but lately the quality of plywood has been decreasing as they've been using this mystery tropical hardwood in there, which makes it heavier and problematic for cabinet making. So I don't know if that's a problem in your area, but if you can look out for this stuff, I recommend it. So that's my highly talkative tutorial tip video today. I'll have some more demonstration woodworking videos coming up shortly.